Good evening, everyone. I'm Phil Pothin, the Ontario Environment Program Manager at Environmental Defence. I'm in Toronto, which is the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat. But many of you are calling from other locations, so I encourage you to introduce yourself and where you're calling from in the chat. I'd like to also highlight that the work we are doing here to protect this land from Bill 23 and from the removal of other environmental protections is in alliance with and supports calls from Indigenous nations to protect the land, including their specific opposition to Bill 23 from the Chiefs of Ontario and others. Let's just have a brief look at the program for this evening. After this brief introduction, I'm going to walk you through the current state of affairs. What has the government done? How far has it moved? And how reversible is it? Secondly, I'm going to talk about some key points of intervention, what we should be doing as activists in order to ensure that by the end of this term, most of these changes have been reversed or abandoned, and that it remains possible after this election to undo any damage that's been done. Then we're going to hear from my friend and counsel with EcoJustice, Laura Bowman, who's going to talk to you about our application for a judicial review of the government's decision to overturn Hamilton's official plan. And we'll be hearing from our friend Franz Hartmann about some other actions that we can do going forward. We'll then have a 20-minute Q&A. I'm just going to leap right into my segment. Starting in 2020, the Ontario government began a multi-pronged, multi-phase push to force municipalities to abandon their efforts to grow sustainably and to redirect investment in scarce resources to the least efficient, most environmentally harmful forms of development. And while they've cynically wrapped these changes in rhetoric about solving housing shortage, which is very real, that wrapping is very thin indeed, because it's clear to anybody who's paying attention that the impact of these changes that the government is forcing on us will be more destruction of green space and wildlife habitat, more car dependency, more sprawl, but fewer and more expensive homes. So phase one of the government's attacks were what we called the big sprawl. And that's a package of seemingly low-key, hard to notice changes that were designed to strong-arm municipalities into unleashing sprawl, but to make it seem as though it was their choice to do it. These included what we called sprawl MZOs, which directly imposed development approvals for particular projects outside of settlement boundaries in places where they didn't make sense, not just to authorize development on those lands, but often seemingly to create a beachhead for wider sprawl. They stripped away standards for efficient land use. So even though they were talking about a need for more housing, they created changes to the rules, which meant that fewer homes would be built on the same amount of land, and thus that each home would likely be more expensive. They intentionally assigned most of Southern Ontario's growth to suburban municipalities, reducing or planning to reduce Toronto's share of growth so that growth would cause sprawl rather than be directed to neighborhoods in Toronto that need more growth and more intensification in order to become sustainable. But the interesting thing is that all of these decisions, which were designed to make municipalities or bully municipalities into adopting pro-sprawl official plans, in many cases, they failed. They couldn't do it behind the scenes because of your efforts. Because of your efforts, because we caught them, and because you pushed back councils in Hamilton, in Halton, In other places, they refused to do what the government hoped they would do. And they chose to follow the law rather than the dictates of the minister. And that means that Hamilton, it did the right thing. It assigned growth. It delivered all the homes that they needed, that the government said they needed, but it delivered them in existing neighborhoods that needed that density to become more sustainable and not in sprawl. Halton refused to sprawl outward when the government counted on their doing that. So after that initial wave, there was a long sort of pause, sort of radio silence. And that radio silence reflected the lead up to the provincial election, the lead up to the municipal election, and it was all very politically cynical because it was designed, again, to make it seem like whatever negative things were happening were the choice of municipalities. But then the mask came off the day after municipal elections, after it was too late for these issues to become part of either the provincial or municipal campaigns. The day after, they introduced what's called the More Homes Built Faster Act, but which was really an attack on regional planning. And here's the main things that it did. It stripped regional governments of the power to plan regionally or even coordinate the provision of infrastructure. It unleashed sprawl in many wetlands, forests, and other areas, even where it would cause or expose residents to flooding or landslides by stripping conservation authorities of the power to deny permission. It manufactured demand for sprawl by failing to deliver the reforms to exclusionary zoning that we and other NGOs and housing advocates had asked for in order to actually fix our housing shortage rather than making it worse. But that was just the first step. That was paired with a direct attack on wetlands, a proposed change to what was called the Ontario Wetland Evaluation System. And this hasn't gotten nearly as much attention as all the other changes, but it is mind-boggling what they've done. These changes to a manual of all things, according to Halton authorities, they would expose 90% of the wetlands that are currently protected from sprawl to development. In Niagara, the figure is 80%. This is a massive change on that will deplete a supply of wetlands that are already depleted. The GTA has already lost around 85% of its wetlands. So that was followed by what are called, we're essentially forced sprawl official plans. So I mentioned that the government's plan to do all this behind the scenes to make it look like municipalities were voluntarily doing this failed, especially in Hamilton and Halton. And so the government overturned official plans, which were doing things the right way, adding homes to existing neighborhoods. And they stripped out provisions that would have required them to add homes to existing neighborhoods, and they replaced them with provisions imposing outward sprawl. And what's interesting is that even when municipalities played ball with the government, municipalities like York, by agreeing to extreme boundary expansions, by acquiescing even to asking to take some land of the Greenbelt, the government imposed even more extreme changes on them. So it's not like any of this could have been avoided by playing nice with the government. Then the big splash came, and that was the direct attack on the Greenbelt. And so that was a 7,400 hectare removal of Greenbelt land with system-wide repercussions because it destroyed the certainty that we need and that farmers need, that landowners need, that tenants in particular need in order to protect natural heritage and not destroy the land as they're using it. And this was followed, and it's likely because of an error or oversight by the government. They thought that they had effectively stripped the Greenbelt of protection, but they made a mistake because the bulk of the land they want to remove is so extraordinary, so valuable, so essential. It's called the Duffins Rouge Agricultural Preserve. It used to be publicly owned, and it had an extra layer of protection. So that protection guaranteed easements that were effectively held in trust for the people of Ontario by municipal governments, and it restored them. And so by repealing what's called the Duffins Rouge Agricultural Preserve Act, they handed what is effectively a property right held in trust for the people of Ontarians and worth hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, to private real estate investors free of charge, even though they never paid for those rights. So those are what's happened. And the government wants you to believe that all of these decisions are final, that this is over, that they've done this, that we can be mad about it, but ultimately it's done. And what I want to underline, and here's the thing, each and every one of these decisions can be reversed every bit as easily as they were introduced. This issue does not end until we decide to let it end. So let's just step back here. The government's strategy through all of this, the way that they are convincing MPPs who are getting their eardrums blown out by their constituents over this, who know that this is extremely unpopular, who sense that this is extremely politically toxic. The senior government's sell to MPPs is that they just need to rip off the Band-Aid all at once, right now in this honeymoon period after the elections. So that's why our strategy, our responsibility is to make sure that everyone understands none of these decisions are final. So Bill 23 is a piece of legislation, much of which hasn't actually been implemented. Certainly the replacement or changes to the regional planning regime have not really been effectively implemented, and they can be repealed and reversed very easily with the stroke of a pen. The Ontario Wetland and Evaluation System changes. The old manual still exists. All that it takes is for us to lean on the government hard enough, make it clear that we did notice this change, and we can save those 80 to 90% of wetlands. The forced sprawl OPs, the main course of action there is, first of all, Laura Bowman is going to talk to you about this. It is a judicial review. So that means that we are challenging the legality of the government's decision. And we're hopeful about that, but I'm going to leave that to her. But separate from that, the government has the power to cancel that decision or overturn that decision or revert to the original official plan. The Greenbelt removals, none of that land has actually been built on. And this isn't the United States, where once you give someone a right or a property right, the government is not in a position to take it away. The government is able to legislatively and regulatorily restore those pieces of Greenbelt just as they strip them out. And with Bill 39, that decision, that act can be repealed. And so with Bill 39 in particular, and with the Greenbelt removals, those issues are remaining live, remaining part of the public imagination because of other avenues that we are pursuing. The government thought that once it carved out this Greenbelt land, it would be over and we'd forget about it. What they did is so fishy that the Auditor General has now launched a full-fledged investigation into the decision itself, not just how it was made, not just who lied, who leaked information, but the entire decision because it's fishy from top to bottom. And that's going to keep going for a long time. And we're going to need you as advocates to pressure that investigation, to participate, to make submissions to the Auditor General. The OPP is considering how much further to go in its investigation over how it is that key, well-connected real estate investors came to know, or so it would seem, that Greenbelt land was going to be open for development when, even as the government was telling the public that that land would never be usable for anything other than farmland. The Premier is denying or rather admitting that there was no authorized release of information. So the question is, who released that information? And then we have an Integrity Commissioner's investigation. So that sounds promising. We are a little less optimistic about that because the Integrity Commissioner is frankly notoriously soft and very rarely imposes many penalties. But all of this is a giant cloud of stink and rot that will linger around this government for years to come. And it's on you to help it stick, to keep up the pressure. And I am very confident that these changes are so unpopular that it remains possible to put enough pressure on MPPs so that they will push from behind the scenes and force a backtrack on these changes. It's happened before. We know that Labor were able to achieve it with the attack on workers' constitutional rights. They passed a piece of legislation and then they repealed it. That's exactly what we can reasonably expect and demand here. And so we're going to keep organizing. Thank you. I'm going to hand you over now to Laura Bowman, my colleague from EcoJustice, our friendly EcoJustice lawyers, to speak about the judicial review of Hamilton's official plan.
Thank you, Phil. Yeah, as Phil has already introduced, after the minister made a decision to overturn the City of Hamilton's official plan, forcing Hamilton to expand by a couple thousand hectares, in addition to its existing urban boundary. The minister made that decision just a few days after the municipal election, when municipalities, hadn't even had their first council meeting yet, along with all the other boundary expansion decisions that the minister made on November 4th. So the minister made that decision. The minister did post something on the Environmental Registry of Ontario, which is the website where provincial decisions are posted for consultation, saying that he was making a decision about the City of Hamilton's official plan, but there was no indication on that public consultation posting that the minister was actually considering this huge expansion to the urban boundary, and no rationale provided for it. So anyone who commented had simply no idea what the minister was actually planning to do. And the actual decision document contains no reasons or explanation for why the minister decided that this huge boundary expansion was needed. And the expansion that the minister imposed on Hamilton was far larger than a kind of more middle ground expansion proposal that the City of Hamilton had considered, and that his ministry had already endorsed as meeting all of the objectives of the process that the minister had put in place. So, we reviewed the decision, no reasons, no explanation, and some fairly significant indications that the minister's decision did not comply with the growth plan requirements for the minister to expand the urban boundary, he needed to have a supporting assessment. He also needed to ensure that his expansion plan, his amendments to the official plan in Hamilton conform to the growth plan minimum intensification requirements. But there is no indication that that is actually the case in his decision. It's sort of to be determined whether or not it complies with the growth plan. So because there were all of these significant errors, we assisted environmental defense in bringing a judicial review. That judicial review will be heard in divisional court, which is a panel of 3 judges. And they'll be reviewing the minister's decision and comparing it to the requirements of the growth plan, the provincial policy statement, and the Planning Act, as well as some provisions of the Places to Grow Act, all of which we say the minister's decision just didn't address. So there, because we don't have any reasons, we don't know why the minister thought that his decision was lawful. On the face of the decision, there's some major errors. And so that will ultimately be heard by the divisional court. We don't have a firm timeline for that yet. Cases of this type usually take a few months to a year to be for materials to be exchanged and argued, but ultimately we hope that the divisional court will see that the minister made some very significant errors and the court can set aside that decision. You know, obviously there were other decisions that also had potential errors in them, decisions like Halton's and Ottawa and York and other places, but this particular decision is the one that we've challenged, and we hope that, you know, by exposing the errors that the minister made, that also bolsters the argument to reverse some of these other decisions. So with that, I will turn it over to Franz Hartmann, the coordinator for the Alliance for Livable Ontario.
Thank you very much, Laura. Hi, my name is Franz Hartmann. I'm the coordinator of the Alliance for Livable Ontario. We're a brand new alliance made up of people and groups who want to build a livable Ontario and reverse the Ontario government's policies that are harming our communities. They're undermining the protection of our farmland, natural areas, the Greenbelt in particular, democratic institutions, all the while the province is pretending to deal with Ontario's serious housing issues. We're a nonpartisan alliance and we welcome anyone who shares our agenda. We're creating tools and resources to help our 630 plus members and over 130 groups that are from agriculture, urban planning, environment, housing affordability, tenants, neighborhood associations, labor, healthcare, academia, businesses, representing hundreds of thousands of Ontarians, with more people joining daily. Visit us at livableontario.ca to find out more about us. So Phil rightly provided an overview of how we can stop the province at the provincial level. But there is another wonderful or another opportunity to fight the agenda that the provincial government is pushing forward. They actually need municipalities to implement Bill 23. Why? Because there are a whole bunch of things that municipalities have to do with their powers to make Bill 23 a reality. They may need to make a bunch of decisions at city councils across Ontario. Specifically, they need to make decisions to build the sprawl infrastructure, the roads, the sewers, the water lines, the bridges, all of those things that sprawl needs. They also, the province also needs municipalities and local councils to approve sprawl developments that have to go to municipalities for approval. And they need municipalities to allocate your property tax revenues, tax dollars, property tax dollars to pay for all of this, which means that the fight, frankly, to stop Bill 23 is now also going to city halls across Ontario. And that's where we need to go. And so what we've done is we've come up with some tools to help local groups fight at City Hall. What we've done in particular is we've created a draft motion. We're going to be creating many more. I'm hoping that the link to this draft motion is now in the chat box. It's a Google Doc, and essentially the motion is designed for community leaders and sympathetic councillors to adapt to meet local circumstances, and then introduce to City Council for discussion. And the motion does a number of things. It starts off by essentially asking council requests the province to immediately repeal Bill 23, Bill 39, and reverse the decision to remove 7,400 acres from the Greenbelt. And then it asks council to report back as soon as possible on how much land and housing units have already been approved in the municipality, because we know that a lot of municipalities already have a lot of housing units in the pipeline ready to go. And getting that information will make it clear that there's already a lot going on, that the development industry also has a lot of places to build in existing urban areas. And then the motion talks about as part of the 2023 budget process, not to allocate funds to infrastructure on lands that are the province wants to push for sprawl. And then the final part of the motion asks for council to direct staff to investigate and report back on a whole bunch of longer term costs that are associated with sprawl. Bottom line is, if you are a community leader, if you are a councillor or know of a councillor who is sympathetic to stopping Bill 23, this draft motion can start the conversation about what your local councils can do to stop this destructive agenda, Bill 23 and others that are coming from the provincial government. We will be creating more draft motions. Just stay tuned. They'll be coming to help deal with a whole bunch of other issues that have been a whole bunch of destructive policies that have come out of Queen's Park. So stay tuned. So with that in mind, I'd like to pass things over to Kim Bradshaw of Stop Sprawl on Halton to speak about the Greenbelt Guardians site surveillance project.
Thanks, Franz. I really appreciate that. Good evening, everyone. If you haven't heard about the Greenbelt Guardians yet, let me introduce you. First, most important is if you see something, say something. That's our motto. We want to make sure that we hear about any activity that anyone notices on any of the parcels that are being threatened, not just the Greenbelt, but all the land that has now been added to our municipal urban boundaries. Next slide, please. So what our Greenbelt Guardian is meant to do is to scout the land. We want to send people out to the parcels nearest to them so that they can take pictures and look for activity that might be going on the land. Maybe somebody's been putting up flags for surveys and showing us where they're going to be pulling things down. Maybe you're seeing land being cleared, or maybe just some trucks are being loaded at the site. Hard to know what's going to happen, but we'd like to know and like to be able to communicate that as widely as possible, make a lot of noise about what's going on. Shortly, we're going to have a website that's going to go up, and you're going to be able to sign up to be a land scout, choose the parcel area that you'd like to operate in. On our website, you're going to be able to see the land on a map and all the different parcels, and you're also going to be able to upload pictures and reports of each of those parcels. So it's going to be an interactive website, and it should be launching within 24 hours. That's my hope. Next slide, please. The regional response teams are actually run independently. There's a very loose organization, an incubator kind of group that's trying to locate people in each of these areas that you see on the screen now. Hamilton and Halton actually have pretty active groups already. They're taking pictures, they're putting reports out, and we're tracking information. There are other people in other areas taking some pictures. I've seen some things on Facebook. It would be really helpful to get people like that to sign up so that we can get their information on the website and share it with everyone. And finally, the most important thing is to make sure that we're not just focused on the Greenbelt. So if you're not in one of the areas that isn't near the Greenbelt that's being pulled out, there's only 7,400 acres, only is really not the right term. There are 7,400 acres being pulled out of the Greenbelt. There are over 37,000 acres that have been added to the urban boundary. That's farmland, that's natural areas that are going to be destroyed. And we need to try to prevent that as any way we can. Next slide, please. As Phil mentioned, we're working not to just be allies, but also accomplices by demanding the government and corporations fulfill their responsibilities as outlined in the Truth and Reconciliation Call to Action. We're actively engaging with Indigenous communities, stewards of the land that is being threatened, and we're working with them to ensure we're acting in a good way. Next slide, please. Last but not least, this is really exciting. We've got a tight group of people that are working to put on quite the welcome back party for Doug on the 25th of February. That's a Saturday. Originally, we had planned to do it on the 21st, thinking we'd like to be there on the first day back at the legislature, but we realized we could probably get more people on a Saturday. We've got all kinds of sectors involved. We've got unions from all different industries that are agreeing to send buses in from cities that are far away. Ottawa, Orangeville, I think there's one coming. So there's all kinds of things being planned. This is not a rally in the sense of, we want to shout angry slogans or whatever. We want to look like we're having a lot of fun. We want to show him how many people we have behind this movement. So if you're upset not only about the Greenbelt and the urban boundaries, if you're upset about the privatization of our healthcare, if you're upset about all the other things in Bill 23, if you're upset about the education and the way that he's treating workers, any and every aspect that Ford is touching our lives in a negative way, we're inviting people to come to Queen's Park on the 25th and share their stories and work together to show him that people power that we have, and we will stop him if he doesn't reverse his actions. And that's it for me. So I'm going to turn it back to Phil. He's going to hold a question and answer period coming up now.
Pardon me, I was muted. Hi, everyone. Yep, as mentioned, I'm about to start a question and answer section. To submit your questions, post them in the YouTube chat or email. I'm waiting for the slide to be shared. It doesn't seem to be yet, but there will be a slide that appears with an email to which you can submit questions. But let's start with the YouTube chat. While we're waiting for the questions to appear, I just kind of want to correct an oversight in my original portion of the presentation, which is that regarding Bill 39 and the Duffins Rouge Agricultural Preserve, a key and very important point of influence, something that could really scuttle the government's plan, is the fact that the federal government has entirely within its jurisdiction, just as with the 413, the power to refuse approval for that land actually to be developed. The moment hasn't come for the federal government to actually exercise that power, but if and when the province issues an MZO or pushes municipal governments to take some step towards actually zoning that land for development or some similar related step, at that point, the provincial government or the federal government could require a federal environmental assessment. And with any reason and good sense, the effect of that environmental assessment would be to say no to this proposal. So that means that regardless of how intransigent your provincial MPP or the provincial government may seem to be, you should also squarely put the responsibility on your federal MP to say no to this. And the federal government can stop the bulk of the Greenbelt removals. So regarding the judicial review, this is the first question. Will there be a stoppage on development while the court is in session? I'd like to pass that question to Laura.
Yeah, so the amendments that the minister made to Hamilton's official plan require what are called secondary plans to be put in place before any development can take place. So right now, individual zoning applications can't go ahead until that secondary planning happens. So there basically isn't anyone about to put shovels in the ground. So we haven't made any applications to stop that from happening because it can't until the secondary plans are in place.
Working on the green building standards impact of Bill 23. But we ourselves at Environmental Defense have spoken out quite a bit. We made a submission to the legislative committee, which touched on those green building standards issues. Toronto Environmental Alliance has spoken out. Franz, did you have any further input on what's being done with respect to the green building standards component of Bill 23?
I do know that there were some revisions that were made prior to it being adopted by the legislature. And some people said it made it less bad, but it's unclear at this point how much less bad it is. Excuse my tortured metaphor. It's not as bad as it originally was, but they made it very, very difficult for other municipalities to adopt green building standards.
So just in terms of how to fix the problem, we've done some exploring, and it looks like there may be a way to replicate a lot of the work that was done through the green building standards through actual zoning bylaws, and that is something that we're asking of Toronto City Council, so that what used to be done through what's called site plan and what was negated by or really prevented by the provincial government's legislation could be replaced by a different kind of municipal tool. So I would strongly urge you to talk to your municipal councillor, tell them, if you live in Toronto in particular, that you expect them to introduce zoning bylaws that replicate the function as much as possible of the rules that were rendered ineffective by the province's changes. Question 3, I think this is probably for Kim. Can Greenbelt guardians and land scouts be beyond the Greenbelt?
Absolutely. We want anybody who's concerned about any of the lands out there to be a scout and report back. We have identified a lot of the white belt that was added to the urban boundary on the map, so you can go ahead and click on it and report on it. But if you have a wetland, for example, near you, or you have another piece of land that you're very concerned about, you see some activity on and you want to report and make sure other people are aware of, we would love to hear about it. So yes, any piece of land you want to monitor would be awesome.
What does the federal government plan to do from with an environmental review? Are there any commitments? This is particularly important as over 60% of land up for development sits adjacent to the Rouge National Urban Park. I think I can take that one myself. We are really leaning on the federal government, on the cabinet to do what is squarely within their jurisdiction, and that is require a federal environmental assessment of anything which opens up any part of this land for actual construction. We're a few steps back from that now. What's happened so far is that the Greenbelt obstacle to developing this land has been removed. The Duffins Rouge Agricultural Preserve obstacle to destroying this land has been removed, but it hasn't yet been added to the Durham settlement boundary, and it certainly hasn't been zoned for development. So speaking of the Greenbelt Guardians, we got a tip off from some folks who were actually in and around this land that there were survey trucks showing up. So we need more information like that so we can get ourselves in line and have a heads up when we know that some kind of MZO is being prepped. So that seems like an indication that we might be expecting an MZO sometime soon. Question 5. Are there any actions at work to repeal the destruction of conservation authorities? It's happening right now. I can talk a little bit about that. There was a protest just yesterday pushing back against those horrible changes. But that's what we're asking you to keep doing, to keep protesting, to keep organizing, to keep leaning on your MPP, especially if your MPP is part of the government caucus, to repeal Bill 23, to let them know that you hold them responsible for it. The issue isn't over for you and won't be over until it's repealed. Is there anything more specific that anyone in our team has planned?
We will hopefully be creating a draft motion that people can try to push through their councils. Most conservation authorities have councillors sitting on them from multiple city councils. So there's again an opportunity to use city councils to at minimum protest the changes that have been made and possibly even to stop some of the changes that the province wants and that conservation authorities would have to agree to.
And unrelated, so there's repealing the destruction of conservation authorities, and in particular, the biggest, most striking attack on conservation authority is that previously the government said on individual cases it could force conservation authorities to issue permits even where development would cause flooding or landslides. The government has actually taken away the power of conservation authorities to refuse permission for any kind of land development covered by the Planning Act, which is almost everything. So given that that's happened, we can ask municipal governments to pass bylaws that try to prohibit anything that the Conservation Authority would otherwise have prohibited, and to do their own work to refuse those provisions. Now, they don't necessarily have the expertise or the staff to do it anywhere near as well as conservation authorities have done, but we want at least that municipal governments have on the books laws, bylaws, which say that anything which the Conservation Authority would have refused permission for prior to Bill 23, that at least in theory, the municipal bylaws prohibit now. Question 6. How much impact will the Auditor General's investigations and ethics investigations actually have? So this is a big question. And it's a bit of an exercise in chicken, because it's in the interest of the provincial government and the PC caucus for us to believe that it's set in stone, that it'll never be reversed, that they are going to go through with this come hell or high water. But we know that that's not true, because we've seen how this government responds to pressure in the past. If we accept that they're not going to change, then the pressure will be off. But if we keep the pressure on, if right up until election day, we still see this pressure, we are going to see a split in the government caucus. And here's the key thing. The underlying premise of the caucus going along with this, with something that is so clearly politically toxic, is that they believe that the premier believes that we'll all blow over. But there are rumors now that the premier may step aside before the next election, which means that the premier knows that these decisions are fatal for the government and that he's going to leave MPPs holding the bag so he can move on to an affluent career of board appointments and everything else that follows a term as premier. And so as that starts to sink in, as that insecurity spreads, MPPs are going to have to ask themselves, do I want to be left holding the bag for such an awful, unpopular decision? And therein lies the opportunity to reverse these changes. General for everyone, in 2018, Ford backed down on the Greenbelt removals. What can we do to recreate that pressure? Well, I've touched on it a little bit. It is not that the Ford government believes that people are okay with what the government is doing. It is not that there is any shortage of ferocity of response. They understand, and our polling, everybody's polling, shows that this is highly unpopular. And not just with what the government may think of as the usual suspects, dyed-in-wool supporters of the government, people of every political stripe, including PC party members, including riding association executives. They are viciously, ferociously angry about this. The government is hoping that it will blow over. So as long as we keep up the pressure, we show stamina, we don't lose interest, we don't think that the issue is over, we keep it going until a year from now, or months from now, or even if it's required right up until the election. Our stamina will be what causes the government on this issue to reverse its decisions on the Greenbelt, on these official plans, Bill 23 and Bill 39.
I'll just join in there. We have an incredible resource, all of us who are on this call and are joining by YouTube. We know a lot of people. We have networks. We have networks of people we work with, our community, our neighbors, our family. And these are people who are outside our kind of typical echo chambers. And it's really important to connect with them and let them know about your concerns. Let them know that there's a whole bunch of different groups that are working on this, environmental defense, Greenbelt Guardians, the Alliance for Livable Ontario. There's a lot of resources out there, and get them engaged. And if we do that, we build an overwhelming force of opposition that will force the provincial government to stop this. So yes, we can recreate it. We do that by tapping into the networks that we know.
Another question, are insurance companies involved in this fight? Can't see how they'd be willing to insure homes that are built on wetlands in areas prone to landslides. Well, here's the thing. Insurance companies are terrified of these changes. They create massive risk, but they're also terrified of the government because this government has demonstrated a very transactional approach to getting what you want out of it. And what that means is that there is every reason to expect real retaliation, real consequences for other initiatives that insurance companies might want to advance if they speak out about these changes on wetlands and how risky they are. And so I don't expect in the immediate future to hear the insurance companies speak out, not because it's not a problem for them, but because unfortunately, the style of governance that we have now means that if you speak out about one issue, you may become, if you are a business or someone who does business with the government, there's a feeling that there may be consequences, whether that's accurate or not.
Bill, I think there was a question about where to go for maps of the removed lands, both the Greenbelt and the official plans. So there is the Greenbelt Guardian website where you can go look at the maps, and we are drawing as many of those sections as we get the information for. There's still more to be added, but if somebody wanted to go and find in their particular municipality, where would they go to look for those maps?
Okay, so in terms of the forest boundary expansions, if you go to the Environment Registry, I'm going to post a link here, and I think my friends will be able to share it further outwards. And you search for, or actually, if you just Google, Google is magic. If you Google Greenbelt Plan Amendment, ERO, you will get the actual government document, which gives effect to these greenbelt removals. And it has the government's maps of the land that they want to remove from the greenbelt. If you Google Hamilton Official Plan, ERO, then you will get the map of the changes that the provincial government has imposed on Hamilton. And likewise, if you type in Halton Official Plan ERO, you will get a map of those changes. But we're working now to compile all of those into a larger GIS map, which is in the works, and you'll be able to see that soon, but we haven't compiled it ourselves yet. It looks like Greenbelt Guardians may have something up now, it sounds like you're saying. There's a question here. Liberal MP Jennifer O'Connell replied, "There is no mechanism currently available for the federal government to stop development of land unless it pertains to projects of federal land use, such as national parks." How should I respond? You should respond that this isn't true, that the federal government has authority to designate a project like this because it directly affects federally listed species at risk, because the management of the Rouge National Park has expressly said that these removals of greenbelt land, the repeal of Defens Rouge Agricultural Preserve, if the development that is meant to unleash happens, that it will have serious adverse effects on the park itself. There are other federal interests that are implicated here. So it is squarely, clearly within the government's jurisdiction to require an environmental assessment and to say no to this development. It's in the government's interest, of course, to take the pressure off itself by pretending that it doesn't have the jurisdiction, but it's not true. And we're asking them to do the right thing, and we're optimistic that they'll do it. We've done our work, and we know that decision, federal government actually doing that, is an extremely popular move. If you're someone who has the ear of a Liberal MP or a member of the federal caucus, put them in touch with me, and I have some very interesting polling to show them.
There's one question here, Phil, that I've been wanting to ask, and that's, can clearing of the land happen before a secondary plan is finalized, even if the building cannot happen?
Good question. I'm not sure. I'm not sure of the answer to that.
Well, so for example, you said we had some evidence that there was surveying going on the Defens Rouge Agricultural Preserve. And we know they don't have a secondary plan for that yet. So why are they out there surveying?
I think it would depend on the particular plot of land and whether it engaged any other legislation. But it's worth noting that even the Conservation Authority has approvals. So they've been stripped of the power to say no to development, to activities that are authorized under the Planning Act. But if those activities have not been authorized under the Planning Act, it seems to be that there may still be some power in the hands of conservation authorities. We haven't entirely explored that, but that's my sense. So my sense is that they shouldn't be able to do anything yet that they couldn't have done without the repeal of the DRAP or the Greenbelt. Laura, I don't know if you have anything to say about that, but there are things they could have done previously as well. So that doesn't necessarily mean all that much.
It really depends on the parcel, and what the specific zoning on the parcel is. So in some cases, there might already be some zoning or some permits in place or site plan approvals or something like that, allowing grading or some like initial work to be done. But yeah, like many of these parcels do not have a complete zoning authorization to actually start building.
All right, well, I think we've reached the end of our time. I just want to thank all of you for coming out. From my understanding, I can't see, based on the way that my system is set up, how many of you are in this call now, but we know that well over 1,000 people is my understanding are supposed to be here, and that is more people that showed up when the attacks on conservation authorities started. And I think just your showing up here today is helping send the message to the government that this is not going to blow over, that the only way they're going to get out of this hole that they've dug themselves into is to repeal, to reverse each of the attacks that they've made on regional planning, on environmental protection, their entire big sprawl agenda. The only way out of this mess is to reverse course. And you're showing up here today has shown that. Thanks so much. Watch for an email to send to your federal MPs asking for a federal impact assessment. We're going to be talking to them in person, but we need your backup to show that this is something that constituents want. Reach out to municipal councilors to ask to those changes, to fill the gap left by the attacks on by Bill 23, so that they try to fill the gap left by conservation authorities, so that they try to fill the gap created by the loss of green building standards. Call your MPP, especially if they're part of the government caucus. Get them to back down, get them to express their discontent, make them remember, make them understand that this is an albatross around their necks that they need to cut off. And go to handsoffthegreenbelt.ca to see what local rallies are happening in your area. Thanks, folks.